Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this online session about building bankable renewable hydrogen projects in America. My name is Belén Gallego, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm from the REMAT and the AGA Insights team. And just as you have seen now in the video, we're putting together an event in Las Vegas in April, the 20th and 21st, to which we invite you all to attend, of course, and Matt and hopefully Shalini, who will also join us as part of the speaking part of the conference. I just want to, this online session is mainly for you to focus on this specific topic that we are going to cover at length also in the session. And why we're covering it, I'm going to give you a very small context because I know the people who are connected know very well about this topic, but essentially, any new technology goes on through bankability challenges in bankability phase, whilst the technology and the financial structuring of those deals get to better known, so to speak. So in this session, we're going to be focusing on how these projects can be built as bankable as possible and de-risked as much as possible. So how do you pick the right technology, the right site, and the right off-takers, and so on and so forth. So welcome, everyone. I see there is quite a few people already connected here in Zoom. There's also a few people in YouTube. However way that you're joining, you can participate in the webinar sending us questions. And worry not, I am not going to be talking about bankability. I'm only going to have the opportunity to ask questions and learn. But who is going to be talking about it are the two experts that we have today that I'd like you to get to know a little better if you don't already. So I'd like to ask Shalini to please introduce yourself briefly so people can get to know you a little bit.
Hello, thank you so much, Belén, and your team. My name is Shalini Ramanathan, and I'm director at Quinbrook Infrastructure Partners. We're a specialist infrastructure fund focused on the green energy transition. I'll tell you more about Quinbrook later on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shalini. And next, I'd like to ask Matt to please introduce yourself briefly so people can get to know you if they don't already.
Yes, good morning. My name is Matt McMonagle. I'm the CEO and founder of Novo Hydrogen, based in Denver, Colorado. So it's still morning for me. And we are a 100% renewable hydrogen focused project developer.
Excellent. So you're here going to hear the two points of view so that you can understand very well, how to build your projects to be as bankable as possible, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of hype right now out there in the industry, but how much of it will translate into real projects that can be financed is the proof of the pudding, as they say. So just before we start and launch into the topics, I'd just like to give you a few housekeeping notes. One, please introduce yourself in the chat. Don't be shy. I'm seeing a lot of shy people here today. Just say your name, your company, and where you're joining from today. The speakers, we love to see, where people are joining from and what kind of companies are represented. So please do that. If you're on YouTube, you can do so as well. Then your questions, of course, we wouldn't be here if we hadn't prepared something, right? Like at the end of the day. But the main thing here is one, that you learn, and two, that you network. These two people are going to be important for you in your projects. You're going to probably reach out because they're experts in the field at some point or another. So these are the two kind of objectives that we have with the webinars. So in that sense, what you need to do is get to know the expertise that they have. So when you need them, you know who to call. And also you have to ask your questions directly. How do you do that? Through the Q&A box at the bottom. I'll be monitoring them and I'll be throwing them out there too. Okay. So without further ado, because there is nothing else. Oh, there's one more thing. We're recording it and you can watch it again. You can share it with your colleagues. We'll send you a link. Okay. So don't worry about that. So next, I'd like to ask Shalini to please give a little bit. First, I want to invite them to give you a little bit of context as to what they know, how they know it, and where they're coming from, so that you get their points of view and their answers and their experience. So Shalini, your opening statement, so to speak, please.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So as I said, I'm with Quinbrook Infrastructure Partners, and we're a specialist fund focused on the clean energy transition. We are currently fundraising for a $2 billion fund. We previously raised successfully $1.7 billion in the Low Carbon Power Fund. And our current investments are in the solar power generation, solar plus storage, battery-based energy storage, green data center, and AI-based energy trading space. Those are our current portfolio companies. And what we do is put capital to work in companies and teams and projects that we believe in that meet our mandate. I've been looking at green hydrogen for a long time. My background, I used to work at the National Renewable Energy Lab. I've worked overseas in Kenya. Before Quinbrook, I worked at a company called Renewable Energy Systems, solar and wind developer. And so I am, I'm an energy nerd, and the promise of green hydrogen, the fact that you can take electrons and turn them into molecules and move them around the world the way that you can't electrons is really exciting. And so of course my challenge and the investment team at Quinbrook, our challenge is to find investments in this space, as exciting as it is, that work, that are bankable and that make commercial sense. And we're currently evaluating a number of opportunities, both specific projects as well as platforms that could become portfolio companies, and working on some partnerships. And fundamentally, the Inflation Reduction Act is so exciting. It's really, set off, I think, a lot of activity in green hydrogen. And I think now we're getting into the realities of, how are we going to finance these projects, and how do you make all of the details from sourcing the green power at a low cost. We all know that's 70% of the cost of green hydrogen. How do you nail that down, all the way through to how are you going to, so you've made green hydrogen, how are you going to get it to market? Are you going to compress it, liquefy it, depending on pipelines, how are you going to reach your customer? And also, of course, my background is in project development and origination. So very much focused on this question of who are the clients, and what do they need? What they're buying green hydrogen or a related product like ammonia or e-methanol. What problem are we solving for them?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shalini. Very well explained. And basically, if there are people in the audience with projects, you'll be like, with very good projects, you'll learn what a good project is like, then they should contact you for sure. And Matt, please, if you can give us also your opening statement and context, that'd be excellent. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So I bring the kind of project developer context here. And for about the last decade, I've been developing renewable energy projects, mainly solar and battery. And for me, I started getting interested in hydrogen as a long duration storage technology, really in early 2020, seeing a lot of the progress, news, hype, buzz, whatever you want to call it, out of Europe and Asia primarily. And my work had primarily been in North America. And I saw an opportunity where I felt like hydrogen was going to be a key part of the energy transition and decarbonizing our economy. And it was still early in the US, but we would be catching up and moving very quickly. And I think that's really come to bear with not only the infrastructure bill from the from Q4 2021, and then of course the IRA from last year has really accelerated things on this side of the pond. And then of course other factors like the war in Ukraine have really put an attention on this. I'm a huge believer in solar and wind and electrifying as a solution. However, I think we need everything, and hydrogen will play a key role. And one of the things that I've really learned in my time in hydrogen is that it's really easy to make black and white comments, but there's a lot of nuance. So looking forward to some hard questions today and going through that nuance. But my firm, again, we only develop renewable hydrogen projects, which for us is typically electrolytically based hydrogen in North America.
Thank you very much, Matt. I think you can hear me now. Yes, you can. So thank you very much. So now you know where we come from, you know a little bit about their experience, and now we're going to launch into the questions. Some of them are going to be hard questions, but again, please do send us the questions because we'll get to them. And actually, the first question, I'm already going to try and tie in into my first question. So my first question was, at the moment, we're hearing so much noise about, green projects, green hydrogen projects, even just low carbon hydrogen projects. Is this PR, or are the deals, are they real? Are they happening? Can we actually, without the announcements from the projects that are actually going ahead? And as it happens, Sonia sent us a question that said, the EU recently said that all the confirmed deals announced, only 10% have moved forward. The question, is it the same in the US? So it's pretty much the same question in a different way. So who wants to start? Shalini, I'm going to maybe start with you, and then, Matt, if you want to add something, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot more projects that have been announced than that have been financed. That is, inarguable. And one reason why is because in the US here, and I should mention, I see all these, amazing countries and places pop up in the chat, and hello to all of you. I've worked internationally before. Right now, Quinbrook, our target geographies are North America, Australia, and the UK. So that's where we focus. In terms of announced projects, there are just, we don't have DOE guidance yet on how you qualify for the maximum value of the hydrogen PTC. And that's going to be critical. We've seen a lot of developer models that assume that you can just buy RECs, you can use grid power and buy renewable energy credits for our international members that are just, tradable and it's reasonably easy to secure. And then we've also seen projects backed by developers who believe that really it has to be behind the meter, and the electrolyzer has to follow the renewables production. So there, big picture, I think there are a lot of issues to be resolved. I think the export projects that have been announced are, really it takes years. They're not going to be happening in the next few quarters. I think for the near-term projects, or the projects that could be moving forward quickly, because you're not waiting for the Port of Rotterdam to build a recracking facility. I think that one of the challenges is the DOE guidance. And then there's also just, as we'll get into, all the other boxes you have to tick for project finance, offtake, and equipment supply. None of that is necessarily in place for lots of projects.
We're at the very beginning, hopefully. Matt, your take.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think certainly one of the questions had a data point on 10% of the projects that were announced in Europe actually move forward. I don't think we know yet on over here, but certainly it's not going to be 100%. It never is, and it's probably going to be a minority. I think for us and for me, developing the projects, one of the absolute fundamentals is that we have to have a customer. There's no merchant market for hydrogen, really, and there's no hydrogen grid like the electric grid or the natural gas grid. Therefore, having the customer, to me, is the fundamental aspect of a project, and then you go from there. In terms of kind of behind the meter or in front of the meter or export, again, I think it's going to take the different timescales, right? The on-site smaller is going to be faster than off-site with the midstream or delivery component to a customer. To the export is going to take the longest. And then to your other point, Shalini, the guidance on the tax credits here in the U.S. specifically from Treasury and DOE is absolutely critical. And I think that's an area that is pretty controversial, in that I think at the end of the day, if you have a direct connection of wind or solar or hydro, those green electrons are powering your electrolyzer. If you are not directly connected and you're doing a virtual construct, that's where it gets a lot more complicated. And there's been a ton of work on getting to hourly RECs and talk on the EU and over here on what's going to count. I think it'll be an evolution as we get to a future state. And once the grid is fully decarbonized, right, then it doesn't matter, because we know it's always going to be a clean electron. The problem is that transition and how do you account for that? So we'll see what that guidance looks like. And I think my view is that, yes, we want it to make sense, and you want it to be as green as possible, but you also don't want perfect to be the enemy of good, right? Because every carbon emission or methane emission we reduce now is impactful then in 5 years or 10 years.
Okay, so there's a lot that you both said there. There is clearly a lot of interest. There's a lot of people moving forward, but there's a lot of uncertainty too as to what are the next steps. This is kind of sort of the gist of things. And with time, more and more projects will become 100% real. But the next question I had is, what kind of deal flow are we seeing at the moment? So is there enough? Shalini, do you get enough projects for all the money you have? And I suppose, Matt, do you get enough money for all the projects you have? That's kind of where we're at. Go ahead, Shalini.
So, we are looking to deploy capital in good projects, and the projects that we're seeing that are near term are it lines up very much with what Matt said. They're targeting industrial customers, or they're working with industrial customers. If you have an industrial customer, let's say a refinery that's currently using gray hydrogen, then you're just trying to sell them on on green hydrogen. It's it's electric, it's electrically made, but it's a similar molecule, so they can easily, you don't need new equipment, you can just start using it. We're also seeing some activity. It's pretty, it's not a lot, and it's restricted to certain geographies in the transport sector. And I think we've also looked at electrification of fleets and businesses in that sector. And one of the challenges with that is it's the grid. You can't just put EV charging, especially for fleets, at scale, anywhere on the grid. There are a lot of grid constraints. And so green hydrogen, there are a lot of projects that are, I think, getting momentum because, they can address that, right? You can, hydrogen doesn't necessarily have that limitation in terms of the grid and charging. The challenge, of course, for transportation is that the, in the vehicles that the green hydrogen fueled long duration trucks, heavy duty trucks are still being made, and you still have to sell the fleet operators to turn over their fleet, to lease it with these new vehicles. And so we're seeing some good, interesting deal flow in the industrial serving projects and with some transportation projects. And there's a lot of discussions that are really exciting. And Matt can speak to this. He has one of those deals around the power sector, but I would say that it has been slower moving. And then lots of activity on exports. But as I think we've all discussed, that's not going to be the first wave to get financed.
So may I just inquire here a little further? You start with the off-taker when you consider the deal flow. That's the first thing that you look at. Where's the off-taker and what they want to achieve, right?
So this is a critical point, and I think it's
I've mentioned it, but
yeah, no, it's so critical. At least in the U.S., and different markets evolve differently, but in the U.S., the model, the way that the renewables industry, solar and wind, have grown is because you have bankable offtake contracts from with buyers who have investment grade credit or posting credit support, and they are essentially they're agreeing to buy what you're producing for however long, right? Ideally, we like 15-20-year contracts in the power sector, and that having that willing customer who is, as stressed, credit worthy really lets us then get project level finance, and that's how the renewables industry has grown. And I think that for the first wave of green hydrogen projects, that's the mindset that I think everyone will bring. And the question is, as the industry evolves, we now have merchant green power, that exists. It's a very specific kind of risk that some investors are taking. And so I think there's a question about how the market will develop and if it will move toward more merchant risk. But I certainly think that because there is no market right now that is, deep and liquid and heavily traded for hydrogen, these offtake contracts and a willing client, that's very important.
Yeah, no, I agree. Go Matt. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, for us, I think, and there was a question that I just answered here. We kind of look at the customer types in three different buckets. It's industry, transport, and power. And of course, those are pretty broad categories, and there's subcategories within them. I think the easiest is folks that already use hydrogen today, and it is a large market. It's roughly, depending on who you ask, around 100 million metric tons per year globally. And from that perspective, if they're already using hydrogen, there's no change to their process. They need the molecule for whatever they're doing. There's really no other option for them. And then it's just a factor of, okay, can we get them clean hydrogen for either cheaper than fossil-based hydrogen, which increasingly, especially after the IRA in the US, we can in many cases, or is there a sustainability or regulatory driver where they either have to do it or the increased price, the green premium, is something that they feel like either gives them social license to operate, or they can market that and sell their end product, whatever it might be, for a premium. On the transportation side and the power, I expected those to go slower because it does require a change of equipment typically. I think on the transportation side, certainly in the US, California has been the leader on the LCFS, and then other states like Oregon and Washington have implemented those programs as well. So I do expect, and we do see customers in those markets where not only is green hydrogen now typically cheaper than diesel, which is what we're competing against for heavy duty transport, but you also have state level incentives or requirements to drive the economics from a total cost of ownership perspective for those customers. And then on the power sector, to me, again, I come from the power sector, so obviously we're gonna have to do a lot of wind and solar, a lot of short-term batteries, but we need, in my view, peaking power and dispatchable power to fill in the gaps, or long duration storage. To me, those are all really the same thing, different ways to say the same things, but it certainly is better if you have direct wind or solar, as opposed to taking wind or solar, splitting water, having hydrogen, and then putting it back through a turbine or a fuel cell. The problem is, right, you can't always, you can't count on the variability of wind and solar. So we're going to need that variability for peaking applications, as well as backup power for folks. Same kind of thing. You can't count on the wind or the sun necessarily blowing when the grid goes down and replacing diesel generators. So I've been surprised at kind of how quickly we've seen some of the power and the transport applications, but most of, I think, the earlier ones will be on the industrial side.
One other thing I would add related to that, to what Matt was saying, is I think it's worth noting that the IRA is supply side policy. It is helping us bring down the cost of making green hydrogen. It is not, and you have other tools and other markets that are more of a demand side push, but the IRA is not a demand side push. And so we still have the job of all of us who care about this industry and want to see it develop, of convincing off-takers, convincing customers to sign contracts to buy the green hydrogen or green ammonia or whatever product we're making. And I think that is, I just want to point it out. It's not like the IRA really created a class of customers. It is supply side, and we have to figure out the demand side.
Thank you very much. Very well explained, actually. And I think is fair enough. We start with industry, then transport, and then power. And I think this was very well understood. And we go first from the users and then everything else. So first of all, a good project should have an off-taker, a credit-worthy off-taker, learning from Shalini. What else does it need to be considered a good project in your books, Shalini?
Yeah, so I think the contract tenor is a critical point. This, as we've said many times now, there really isn't a tradable market for hydrogen today. So we're all trying to figure out, when that market emerges. And so, if you have a customer who's willing to take that hydrogen for 10 years, that is easier for us to understand that risk than a customer who's signing up for 2 years, right? Where then you have, X years after that, let's say, 20 years after that, that you have to figure out what you're going to do with what you're producing. So the contract tenor, the terms matter, not having anything in the contract where they can terminate or, price adjustment on their side, and all of that is really important. The source of green power is critical. I saw something in the chat about, is it really 70%? For the projects we're looking at, it is. And so we're looking hard at the green power story in projects and making sure that, that either there are, strong agreements in place, or they're located in markets where, we can all convince ourselves that the price of green power will continue to be low. Right now, in terms of equipment, PEM and alkaline electrolyzers, that's well understood technology. If that's what you're going to do, I think that that we certainly believe that the major manufacturers, that's bankable. Same with compression technology, liquefaction. There's a set of suppliers that you can take to the bank, as it were. But there's some new and exciting electrolyzer technologies like AEM, and that we don't know yet exactly what the bankability of that will look like. Water, water is a critical input. You can't make green hydrogen without it. And I think it's worth we as an industry have to explain that while you need water to make green hydrogen, water is used in much larger quantities for other uses. Dairy farms use a lot of water. Agriculture uses a lot of water. Coal-fired power plants use a lot of water. So it's not like we're unique in needing water, But that source of water and having senior water rights and knowing and having some confidence that the water won't be affected, which is a key issue with climate change. Those are all things we look at. And we also just we're looking at teams, right? I mean, are these teams that we're evaluating, are they people who can problem solve all the way to getting a project up and running and keep problem solving to keep delivering green hydrogen to a customer?
Excellent. Thank you. It's very, very thorough, your response. I don't know, Matt, if you want to add something, or can I ask you the next question?
Well, just on the water side, and I know this was something that we were gonna touch on.
Ask, but we can go now because it's important. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, for me, and when doing traditional renewables projects, water doesn't matter at all, right? So it's a new feedstock for green hydrogen projects. And generally what I found in the US is that east of the Mississippi, it's not that big of a deal. West of the Mississippi, it's a huge deal, right? Obviously, we have the drought. However, what I've found is that many other industrial uses or agricultural uses, they use a lot more water than electrolysis does. So when you look at the numbers, it looks eye-popping and really big compared to, right, how much you or I use for cooking or taking showers. But compared to other uses, it's really not that big of an impact. It's more, where are you using it and where will we be using it? So it's, again, the specific geographic concept or construct, it comes into play. But at the end of the day, right, this is a huge part of a Bankable project. For me, with green hydrogen, I can't make green hydrogen if I don't have water. So we have to have that water access and long-term secure. It's kind of depressing, but the cost is pretty insignificant. It's more, can we get the water or not?
Just to give you here a little bit of a historical perspective, the CSP, concentrated solar power folks like myself, and there'll be a few in the audience, I feel, we've been fighting this battle for a while. And, what you mentioned right now is something that we found time and time again. When like just one hole in a golf course nearby uses more water in a month that the entire project uses in a year, and still you're being told you use too much water. This is the kind of thing that I think requires a lot of very careful PR and work with the local communities, because for some reason, we put things in different categories, and then it's like, oh, this golf, I like golfing, so this is not a lot of water versus this is a lot of water. So it's something we're going to have to work a lot more. And I think renewable folks, especially if they come from solar and wind, might not be so used to that, but I can tell you definitely historically, we've seen issues with that. You guys weigh in. If there's anyone there, that has anything else to say, please send it through the chat. And we'll move to the next question if you think. And okay, the next is about wrapping low hydrogen, zero carbon hydrogen projects. What are the main challenges? Is it an issue of revenue? Is it an issue of the partners, the equipment? Like, if I get different equipment, can I be not bankable, or can my risk go up enough? Shalini, I'm looking at you.
Yeah,
from
so
the
I
money
think
perspective, yeah.
A lot of the issues, you want bankable technology, right? You want all the way through the chain, right? Not just hydrogen production, but what if you're making another product from hydrogen, what technology are you using for that? Is that bankable? Is that a bankable vendor all the way through? How are you going to get it to market? One other thing I wanted to raise, on this point is that in terms of bankability, I feel like there is a lot of focus on making green hydrogen and maybe a little bit less focus on, okay, so you've made it, but then what? If you're very far away from a use case or a customer, I think that's it's a little bit challenging. And so we're looking for projects. It's not that, we need projects to be perfectly de-risked. This is an early days in an early industry, in a new industry. But I think that development logic of have you thought through, everything, and you have answers for all of the issues that'll come up. I certainly think that, certainty of revenue is critical, and, costs are really important. Green power costs are, we have a company called Primergy, solar plus energy storage company. And so we see firsthand that power prices for solar power are going up. There's more demand, there are transmission, interconnection challenges, as we all know. And so projects that are ready to go are getting a premium in the market. And that's great if you're a solar producer. But I think as an input to hydrogen, it raises some questions. Do you really want to lock in, let's call it, 2024 COD type pricing for 15 years today? Do you want to do that?
Thank you very much, Shalini. Yes, Shalini, I agree. We, know perfectly the risks, but we need to be thinking about how to de-risk as much as possible. I'm going to continue on, Matt, unless you want to add, please stop me if you want to add anything at any point. And I'm going to ask you directly, can we borrow know-how from other markets, or do you see the innovation coming mostly from the US? So I'm going to start with you, Matt, this time.
For me, it was extremely important for me when I built my team to bring in a variety of experiences. And again, I mentioned this before, I come from the power sector, but I brought in folks from corporate sustainability, software sales, oil and gas, all types of renewables, other types of policy and sustainability, et cetera, because I think hydrogen is broader in that you have the electrical side, but you also have kind of the industrial or plumbing or chemical engineering side as well. And then you have the molecule plus the electrons. So you really need the expertise for all of that, which is one of the reasons why I love what I do in this space, because there's so many different perspectives to bring in, but that was absolutely critical for me, because I like to say we want my team to be the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And we really spend a lot of time learning from each other, because this is a new industry and we have to bring that innovation on what is going to work. I think the other kind of attractive part for me was that electrolysis has been around for over 150 years. So that's not a new technology. What's new about it is that we're scaling up and really ramping up the size of projects and the amount of capacity, because we have to now to decarbonize. And therefore driving down the price. But the fundamental technology is not new. We see kind of more stepwise or incremental improvements and the scale up, like we've done with solar wind batteries. We also have, as a society, a great framework to work off of in terms of safety, because again, hydrogen is a market that we use. And once you make it, it's the same molecule. So we have standards. It's certainly something that we have to take very seriously, the safety of, but for me doing batteries, I feel a lot more comfortable in the standards and the know-how with hydrogen than we did with lithium-ion batteries 5 or 6 years ago. Now, asterisks, I'm sure many of you have seen or might have seen Glass Onion on Netflix, Daniel Craig's movie. If you haven't, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but they talk about solid hydrogen and they throw it around like a rock. That, of course, is not going to happen, because solid hydrogen, you need it to be like 14 degrees Kelvin. So it's pretty dang cold. But anyway, I think the fundamentals there on safety, the equipment, and we can leverage that, and then bring in the innovation that has happened on the renewable side and software, et cetera. I was just typing an answer to the question from Anton on kind of PV-SIS WindPro. There aren't tools for hydrogen right now. So there are some startups working on that. I'd love more there. And for my company, we kind of had to create some on our own to figure that out. But I think as this industry rapidly develops, we will see more of that ecosystem to help make projects more efficient.
And the NREL is working on one too. Like they have already one called HOP, but it needs to be extended from talking to them. So yeah, it's going to change a lot actually in terms of the tools that you have available. And in terms of financial innovation, which I think is the key to this, Shalini, mostly from the US, right?
Yeah, so I think some of the key questions, and I see some of them in the chat, so I'll try to address them here, is, if I think the question of how much debt can you get, what is the gearing on your leverage, that is a big one, right? That is going to really drive economics. And, I think we're talking to banks to figure that out. And of course, it depends on, how good a project is, how good the offtake is, et cetera. But I think the availability of debt and what it looks like also point out that, interest rates are changing, they have for the past year. And so I think, we're definitely seeing some project level models that are using, outdated interest rates. Like, we don't think you can get that anymore. So that's a key issue, for financing. If hydrogen and ammonia, all of that, if those products are green versions of those products are going to be sold for, let's call it 3 to 5 year contracts, I think the bankability, this is a big discussion, right? Certainly you can now get debt for a solar project that has merchant exposure. I think we know enough about those markets to understand them and explain, why we think a given risk is manageable. There are developers doing that. For hydrogen, it's new, and so how much debt can you get if your offtake is, if your contract tenor is just for a few years? I think that's a critical one. We haven't talked about tax equity. I'll put it out there. We of course have direct pay for 5 years, but then after that, it's a different story. And so I think the availability of tax equity, and there's a shrinking pool of tax equity in the U.S.
Just go for it, because it was the next question. So please,
did I? I'm sorry,
about tax equity. Yeah. No, but go for it.
I'm going to stop. I'm sure Matt has thoughts on tax equity, so I'm going to stop now.
No, but I think, it was the next thing, right? Like, we talked about the IRA, we talked about all of this, sort of like programs, or, how do they help? Do they help now? How well defined are they? So does tax equity help you today, Matt? And how does it help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, when so I founded my company kind of late summer, early fall of 2021. And as I'm sure many of the US focused folks on this call can remember, at that point, it looked like we had a good chance of getting Build Back Better passed via reconciliation in December of 2021. Of course, that didn't happen. And we had to wait a little bit longer, but it happened. And once the IRA was signed by the president, right, that effectively cut the price of hydrogen in half, of clean hydrogen in half in the US. And the 45B production tax credit, right, as Shalini was mentioning, has 5 years of direct pay, meaning you do not need to source external tax equity for that. Now, I think for projects that do that, right, if they're structured appropriately, then you will have taxable income for years 6 through 10 that can absorb that tax credit, or you have to get tax equity at that point, or there's also transferability, so you can sell those tax credits to somebody else. So I think we will probably see all of those 3 scenarios for years 6 through 10. For me, we also have projects, Novo Hydrogen's projects, where we're developing our own solar or wind to directly feed our electrolyzers. And in that case, right, there's no direct pay for solar or wind under the IRA, in which case we have to source third-party tax equity. And so for that, you might as well just roll everything into that, because the name of the game for tax equity is to get the scale and get the interest of the big players that are providing that. But I think the new flexibility for the IRA is extremely important and helpful. And yeah, every project in our US, of course, will be taking advantage of those tax credits that are now available. Not to mention, right, the long lead time, right, of how long those are available has never happened in the renewables before. It was always herky-jerky. You get a couple years and then you don't know, and it typically was extended, but you didn't count on it. We can now count on that. We'll see if they last for 10 years, actually, and I kind of hope they don't, because that means that the industry has developed rapidly and we don't need them, right? The point of those is to get to scale and do what we did for wind and solar to bring the prices down. But the certainty going forward is extremely helpful. And I've seen that with our discussions with customers, our discussions with lenders, investors on the corporate side, the project side, et cetera.
One other thing I'll add to that, it goes to the financing broadly, is supply chain and equipment orders. There are right now, there is a shortage of electrolyzers. There are so many electrolyzer lines being put in that I think this will ease up in a couple of years. But if you have a near-term project, you have to put down deposits probably earlier than you're comfortable with, right? Like before you have everything nailed down. And yet, if you get everything else and then you try to order your equipment, you might find that you've been timed out. So that that's just critical.
I was just thinking, that with this tax equity, things have changed so much. It begs the question, was it necessary? Like, how much is this going to speed up the market versus like generating like a huge amount? Because it worked before with like smaller incentives. So why now? Why these big incentives? Just so much more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I founded my business and my fundamental plan, of course, did not assume the tax credits because you can never count on federal legislation, but it's really an accelerator. So it wasn't really a binary if it's going to happen or not. It was more the timing. So it certainly brought things forward, which I think is great, right? Because at least for me, every one of my projects will be offsetting carbon emissions. So we'll be, right, we don't just make hydrogen, it's always clean hydrogen. So we're always going to be either replacing fossil-based hydrogen or natural gas or diesel or some other fossil fuel. And the more reduction we can make faster, right, it's very hard. It's going to be very hard for us to get to net zero by 2050 as an economy. And that sounds like a long time to go, but we need to do stuff now because infrastructure decisions, industrial plant decisions, right, once they're made, they're there for 10, 20, 30 years.
It's kind of like trying to break with the previous structure, right, that were there, like a really rapid change throughout. I mean, it's amazing. I think in Europe, we need to learn a thing or two from you guys, because really, like, if we don't hurry up, in the end, you're going to show us how it's done, really. It's just insane. When I think about, I remember the PTCs and the ATCs used to be 2 years, and each time and that was it. And there was no direct payments, and still, the prices that we got were really, really low in like relatively 10 years, maybe 15 years. So this is kind of like, it's a different ball game altogether. Looking forward to seeing the results. So the last question I'm going to ask before we go, because we have tons of open questions from people and I want us to be able to answer them, is about the infrastructure. We haven't really discussed much, but infrastructure is a massive deal. It's very expensive to store and transport hydrogen. So how much of a factor is it? Are we going to have those bits in mind? I know there's programs that are looking at infrastructure and that side of things, but is that enough, or is it like something that we need to also look at? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Shalini, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a critical challenge. So one of the things that, and the Inflation Reduction Act is, I just really was listening to a podcast about how it came together, and I am so grateful that the industry experts who really have specific knowledge were consulted, and there's so many incentives in the IRA that I think are just very thoughtful, like direct pay for a new industry like green hydrogen, right? So we don't have to try to go get tax equity for the whole 10 years at the very beginning. One challenge is that, the permitting bill that was also supposed to be passed in the U.S. talked about at various points, was not passed. And so there's a lot of infrastructure, and, it relates to green hydrogen because of making green power transmission, right? To really ease some of the interconnection challenges. That's critical infrastructure for green power and green hydrogen. And there are a lot of incentives in legislation, but fundamentally permitting continues to be a challenge. I think to really, Matt, really put out that 2050, what does the world look like question, and how do we get to deep decarbonization? We're going to need to move hydrogen through pipelines. And I know right now there's some efforts to look at blending, it's small amounts with existing pipelines. But how do we get to the infrastructure of having purity hydrogen pipelines, that take hydrogen, from various production hubs to various, users and clients. So I think the infrastructure of how, and even a simple things. I was on a call yesterday where I learned this, that a lot of the transportation vehicles that can use green hydrogen, there are weight issues, and so do we need, where those trucks are used, what does that imply for, reinforcing roads and infrastructure in that way? So, the infrastructure to support not just the production, but also the transport and ultimately the use of green hydrogen is, it's a huge opportunity. It's really exciting, but infrastructure it's always challenging. It's what we do, so we can confirm that it's hard.
Shalini, if you have to reinforce roads, I mean, you would imagine that, it doesn't weigh that much compared to diesel or something. But there you go. Gosh, I hadn't even imagined that either. Matt, go ahead, please, with your take on the infrastructure side.
Yeah, I think for us, and one point that I really want to bring up, and I've struggled with in my career, is that interconnection of renewables is absolutely horrendous and painful in the US. And it certainly needs to get better. And I hope it gets better because for some of my projects, I will be a customer of renewables on the grid. But it's really broken. And I know FERC just approved PJM's revised proposal, but PJM basically had a 4-year pause. The amount of gigawatts in every grid in the US is insane, and building transmission is very difficult. And I think the way that we look at things, again, we need lots of solar and wind, and that's not going to change, but the amount of land that is next to a substation or transmission lines is pretty limited. And therefore, one attractive aspect of green hydrogen is that you can make it away from where the existing grid is and still take advantage of good wind, sun, land, where neighbors are want this types of things, and move the molecule as opposed to the electrons. Again, it's in all the above. We need to build lots of infrastructure. It's very hard, no question, but it's so important. For me, we look at, right, permitting is what we do. That's kind of our fundamental. Therefore, we have to look and evaluate up front, where's the best spot for us to spend our time and our money to give us the best chance of success. And there's many factors, right? Is it next to roads? Is it next to existing pipelines? Is it next to the grid infrastructure or not the grid infrastructure? Does the local community have some sort of code in their ordinance that this could fall into? Do they want this? Do they not want it, right? NIMBY, I've heard the term NIMBY, of course, has been around for a while. I've now heard recently YIMBY, right? Yes in my backyard, opposed to no in my backyard. So we try to find the YIMBYs, not the NIMBYs. Especially in the US, there's lots of old, dirty infrastructure. Can we reuse that in a clean way? And we have the jobs, we have the infrastructure, we have a brownfield site that's already been disturbed. Can we use that now to make something new? So it's complicated. That's the fun part of it. And it's a big puzzle that we have to put together. But yes, we have to build lots of new infrastructure to do this energy transition. And this is one part of it.
It's awesome. I feel like, you said at the beginning, Shalini, where you're an energy nerd. I think that we're all kind of like so excited right now by the opportunity. We're all energy nerds and we're thinking, yeah, I love the challenge. I love this. Matt, love the energy there with that. Just wanted to go to the questions now, if we may. Okay, let's see. There's a question about CapEx and OpEx, but I think that's a little bit outside of our scope. So I'm going to go. Dana Younger's a good friend of mine. Hi, Dana. So the EU targets of 10 million PPY tons per year of domestic production and 10 million. It's not tons. It's is it tons? Well, teras, I think maybe of imported green H2. That's the target for 2030. They want to import 10 and to make 10 in Europe. To produce 10 million requires 500 terawatt hour of electricity, which is the current production capacity of all renewable energy sources in the EU. This seems like a very challenging target to meet. Any views on the time frame for realizing the EU targets? Well, of course, this is not a EU bankability, but he's got a really good point. I have a good friend that worked in the International Energy Agency that actually Dana knows as well, that he says, don't focus on the hydrogen, focus on the renewables. You need more renewables before you can start thinking about hydrogen. Can we make, because 10 million tons is nothing for what the US is going to need. So can we build enough renewables? I'm going to send this to you, Matt.
Yeah, and I think, I can't say specifically for the EU, but it's the same question everywhere. So there's another question too, right? Where, again, for me, most of my projects are green hydrogen or electrolytically based, but there absolutely will be other types of clean hydrogen production pathways that take advantage of whatever existing resources there. So certainly all clean hydrogen will not be electrolytic hydrogen. And then going back to my earlier point, we need to build lots of renewables. That doesn't mean we need to connect them to the grid. And there's plenty of land, at least in the US. Again, Europe is a little bit more constrained. People have been there for longer, but there's plenty of land to build up renewables. It's just not necessarily next to the grid. So that's kind of another factor that has to come into play. But then you also have supply chains, and to me in the U.S. the tariffs on solar panels, for example, are not productive. The incentives in the IRA to do domestic manufacturing, I think, is a good step, but you can't cut us off from other opportunities and equipment, et cetera. So that's another concern. Yeah, it's going to be hard, no question.
It's a lot, but Shalini, you want to add here?
Yeah, if you think about where we have a lot of land in the U.S. And where you have, lower cost, right? Lower cost relative to other places, green power. It's really the middle of the country where I've certainly done a ton of work, and I'm sure Matt has too. And so you make it there. Well, then how do you get it, to a market? And do you have the rail? Do you have the roads? And I think that's where the challenge is I don't think it's going to be possible to have gigantic, renewable projects that are just co-located in your ports. Like that's just not how our land use, that's not what our land use supports. So it goes back to this question of, you can't just look at, is there enough land and can we do this? It's, is there enough land? And then is there connectivity to market to make it happen?
Yeah, the land is there, definitely. I think we could develop, but it's a lot, because when you transfer into hydrogen, it is a lot. I think it's more challenging probably in Europe. I mean, you're right. This is what we're looking at, bringing in so much from outside. In the US, you have a lot more land and a lot more, but that doesn't mean it's not quite a challenge.
Well, and one thing I want to add is, we're all thinking about things like we're moving pieces together to make projects happen. And, Matt talked about it, the community support is critical, right? So it's not just for any of us to say, oh, I think this location is perfect. We can think that, but then you have to talk to the people who were there. And, I'm glad to hear there's a YIMBY movement. That's delightful. I haven't heard that. But, it's really important, I think, to do that as an industry, to do that consultation to make sure these projects are supported and the investment is welcome.
Yeah, no, I was glad too. I hadn't heard that expression too. So thank you very much for giving us the know-how, Matt. I'm going to ask two more questions from the questions here, unless you want to ask any more. One is, we only have like 7 minutes or so. Is it economically feasible to buy from the grid in any state and develop a bankable project with ammonia use, for example? Asman asks the question.
Yeah, great question, impossible to answer, especially in the U.S., right? So a couple things. One, the power prices are all over the place, right? So you have to look at a given project. There's another question too on kind of capacity factor, or what the capacity factor is. So that's an important one, because the electrolyzer, which are relatively expensive now, you want to use as much as possible, but you also have to look at the cost of the electricity. Therefore, it's something you have to model on a project by project basis, and it's really hard to give a nuance. You then lay on top of that the TBD aspect from Treasury on the IRA, what counts as clean energy, and at least for us, we'll do whatever it takes to both meet that, to get the highest or the lowest CI score, highest amount of credit under the IRA, and then a customer might want a stricter definition as well. But we have to wait on what that is. And right, some power markets are deregulated, some are within an ISO, some are not within an ISO. Some areas have green tariffs, some do not. Right, some grids are already clean. Excuse me, not very many. You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But effectively, what I can say in a broad brushstroke is that for us, we try to get as clean, cheap, resilient power as possible. And that's just going to look different based on your local context.
And a critical question embedded in all of that is, what do you believe about the future? What do you think that the green power price is going to be where you're building a project in X years? If you're just buying grid power and your price for power isn't locked in, that's a big question to answer. Do you really think it's going to be at a price that works for your project for the long run?
Yeah, I mean, there are like consultancies that focus on this, just you figuring out what's the merchant price for energy in however many years. but they will also write like, if we make a mistake with our calculations, it's not our fault. So it's one of those things that you have to really take a gamble. Generally, the prices of renewables have gone down because you can pretty much place them everywhere, but we'll have to wait and see, I suppose. But Ruth sends a question here, says, what is the approach to obtain financing in the absence of warranties provided by many of the electrolyzer suppliers?
Yeah, I think that just goes to project finance fundamentals. So I think to kind of synthesize it, right, that's a key aspect. So you have to have your revenue locked, right? That's your contract. You have to have your feedstocks as locked as possible. So for green hydrogen, that's water and power. For blue hydrogen, right, that's your natural gas and power and somewhere to put the carbon. For other waste to hydrogen, it's the waste and water, whatever you need, right? So you have to have those locked. And then in terms of, you have to have a bankable contractor, right? And consultants and operations and maintenance, et cetera, to run the project from a people side. And then you have to have equipment that lenders are going to trust. So I would just say that you have to get insurance, you have to have the warranties, you have to do that. That's a must-have for these projects.
I don't understand. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but in the absence of warranties makes no sense to me. Why would you buy equipment from people who won't warranty it?
Well, it's pretty clear, right? So like, just pick the right suppliers. I guess at the moment, the electrolyzer supply chain, it's, the timelines are so high and there's so much competition. So I suppose it can be hard depending on what project you have in mind. But it's a good point here is like, make sure that you're right from buying from the right people. Just the last question, because we literally have 3 minutes. We talked a lot about jobs, about, YIMBY, NIMBY, how we can make sure, that the projects that we're doing, like they hint, I'm being really kind of like commercial here. They fulfill the criteria that the IRA has around fair transition, local jobs, local manufacturing and all of that, because it can be something that it's above and beyond perhaps that we had before. There has been a little bit of that, but not as openly and as extensive as the IRA now commands for these projects. So what is your thoughts on making sure that we tick those boxes appropriately and we leave like a fair transition for the areas where we build these projects? Shalini.
So I think the IRA has incentives, right, for additional incentives on top of the adders on top of the green hydrogen PTC based on location. So if you're in energy communities, you get an adder for that. There are workforce adders as well. So I think that those are great starts, right? That's a way of making sure that we're doing these projects in a way that benefits communities. And I think that the climate transition as a whole is just a huge opportunity for workforce development, for building a lot of great projects and creating a lot of new jobs.
Thank you very much. And Matt? Yeah, you have to engage with the community, right, to understand what they want and if it's going to make sense, right? You want advocates, not antagonists, and that's kind of development 101. But it's always local, right? And so you have to understand that, and you can't just try to shove what you think is right down someone's throat. That's never going to work.
Used to, but not anymore. So now you have to be thinking about your project a little bit more holistically, for sure. And that's the case pretty much everywhere around the world, but certainly the US. And also because of the mandates from the IRA, you need to be thinking about these things very carefully indeed. It can work in your favor, as we heard, the IRA does have some money there, and if you're in a hub, there is also other laws. So that is like great things to also bear in mind. I think we've wanted to. We did leave some questions out there, but for the next time, just one more, like an invitation for everyone to participate in our event in Las Vegas. If you want more information, you can get it in our website. And thank you, Shalini. Thank you, Matt, for sharing with us. Remember, it's not only about learning about the information, it's about networking. So Shalini and Matt are really great contacts that you'll be lucky, if you can work with. So I very much encourage you to reach out if you have something that, could be a deal for them, for you, some partnership going on. And we hope also that you can come to Las Vegas and then meet them personally. And without further ado, just thanking you once again, and thanking everyone in the audience, and leaving you until next time.